everybody. My name is Dr. Raven Baxter, and I'm also known as Dr. Raven, the Science Maven to the public. I am a science communicator and molecular biologist, and science communicator really just means someone who has a background in scientific expertise and talks about science with the public with a goal of broadening public understanding and engagement with science. I'm a molecular biologist as well, as I mentioned before, and that is a profession that is near and dear to my heart. It is the study of molecules and how molecules operate and what their functions are and structures and how they work to generate life processes. And so people who are molecular biologists, you can often find them doing things such as, but not limited to, cancer research, drug discovery, so finding drugs to treat different diseases. You can also find them working with animals in certain regards or plants. And it's a very broad and diverse field, but just focused on molecules. And so sort of like you all, I am also passionate about STEM, and obviously I have interest in a STEM career that I've pursued since my youth. And the ages that you all are at right now, when you're just getting started in your STEM journey, is a very exciting time. And so today I want to share with you some really important things that I've learned along the way that have been critical to my success as a STEM professional, and have been critical to my success as a student and beyond. So I'll begin by sharing with you how I got started with my STEM journey. I was a very inquisitive child, meaning I had questions about everything. I was so curious about the world around me, and maybe you can relate. You can just look at something around you and be like, why is this that way? Why is the sky blue? Why is water wet, right? We could talk about that forever, right? Little things like that. I'd be digging the ground and the dirt, looking at bugs. I'd be looking in the sky at the clouds, trying to figure out weather patterns and the science behind weather. And I was very much just into everything. And I was using the tools and the resources around me to answer those questions, whether I was reading books or going on the internet or asking, adults who could potentially pull from their expertise to help me answer these questions about science that I had. I was then, little did I realize, at the beginning of my journey as a scientist. And it all begins with a question, right? And seeking answers. So I got older, and that love and passion for science grew, and I began to seek out opportunities to really have hands-on experiences in science. And so I found out about Space Camp, which is amazing. And if none of you have ever heard of it, Space Camp we have in America, it's an organization where they host camps, and camps for people of various ages, from elementary to even adults. And so you can go to Space Camp for different periods of times. I went for a whole week, and we did junior astronaut training. So I learned all about how to fly a spacecraft. I learned about how to operate mission control. And I also learned about all of the different missions that organizations like NASA, and now, even private organizations such as SpaceX or, Blue Origin, are working on, and goals that these companies have in space exploration. And I also learned about all the careers that they have. And so once I learned about that, I kind of went down a rabbit hole. Side note, what really impacted my future career choices here was that I found out I was afraid of heights at space camp. So, at the time I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I realized maybe that's not the best career for me. So I kind of turned my sights back to Earth. And so by the time I was in high school, I became really interested in environmental sciences and Earth earth-friendly practices. And so I wanted to study the environment. And I also wanted to be a part of the legislation and the policy making for laws that protect the environment. And so I ended up continuing my science exploration, and I went to a school specifically for that, a college. I graduated high school at 16, and I went to State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And that is a school specifically for the environmental sciences. And so what was really cool about that was that even my math classes were about the environment. And sometimes they would even take us outside and we'd be doing math equations on sidewalk in chalk, right? Or for our biology labs, they would take us out on buses to the forest, and we'd be like knee deep in rivers collecting invertebrates, fish, or turning over rocks and looking for salamanders and things like that. Everything was very hands-on and focused and centered in the environment, and that was cool. And I made a lot of friends, and I did struggle though, right? I didn't always have it easy on my science journey. I got to college when I was 16, right? And that's a little bit younger than what age most people go to college. Usually it's a little bit older, not too much older, but a couple years does make a bit of a difference at that age. And so I was naturally gifted and talented in the sciences. As I said before, I've always had this natural inclination to science, but I didn't really understand how to be a scholar, right? It's when you get to college, it's not just enough to be smart. It's not just enough to be interested. You actually have to apply that interest and gift to your scholarship. Like you have to study, you have to read, you have to really work hard at it to get to really reach your full potential and get the most out of your college experience. And so I ended up failing out of college, actually. And a lot of people are surprised to hear that because they see how successful I am today. I have a doctorate, a PhD, and people can never imagine that someone like me has ever failed so badly. But yeah, I actually didn't get good enough grades to stay at the school that I was at. And so even though I was really enjoying my experience, it's because I didn't understand how to be a scholar that I couldn't continue on at the college. And so I ended up leaving. I had to come back home and live with my parents, which was really disappointing for me because I'd finally been free and was off at college. And I had to come back home. I went to a community college, so a local school, a 2-year school, but I stayed home just to retake the classes that I failed and get my grades up. And I regained my confidence as a student. And so by the end of that year that I spent at that community college, I then went to and transferred to a 4-year school again, but this time a different school. And I ended up staying there until I graduated from college. But something really special happened after I went back to a 4-year school and transferred out. It just so happened that this new school that I was at didn't have an environmental sciences program. And my parents really wanted me to stay at the school. I didn't really have any other options at the time because I was still getting my grades up. And my GPA at the time, my grade point average was really just good enough to be at this school. It was a good school, but they were more so focused in the liberal arts instead of the sciences. So there weren't many opportunities in the sciences there, but they still had some. I ended up having to change my major to biology. And for the biology major, there was a requirement for the program, which was genetics. And I would have never thought to have taken this class because I was so focused on the environment, right? Like big things, trees, forests, ecosystems, animals, right? Species of animals and climate. I was focused on very big things. And I wasn't at the time very interested in the very small things that you couldn't even see, like molecules or genes, DNA, right? I had really no interest in it at the time, but I had to take this class because it was required to graduate. And I wanted to graduate, obviously. And so I took genetics and I became so fascinated with it. The genetic code is something that all living organisms have. And it's something that we all share, something that we share with trees, right? It's something that we share with bugs, even little germs, right? DNA is the backbone of all of these living things that we have. And it was amazing to me that we all don't know so much about this, right? I was in a class with biology majors, but I wanted to tell my friends that I'd made in art, right, who are art majors, about like molecular biology. And I wanted everybody to know how cool this was, that we have these little protein machines in our cells that are doing work to keep us alive. And it was incredible to learn about the little worlds that we have within ourselves, that we can understand how we can study to understand how humans operate. And so I started looking more at the microscopic level and submicroscopic level, and looking at molecules and the world of molecules. And that is eventually how I became a molecular biologist. So I went on to study that, and I ended up graduating with honors from college. And that was such a huge improvement from where I started, where I failed out of college my freshman year. So I was really proud of that progress. And I kept going, right? I was motivated. I was ready to continue. I felt really confident as a student. And I said, well, you know what? I can do this again. I went and I got a master's degree in molecular biology. And during my master's degree, I studied protein folding. So again, I was still in molecular bio. I was looking at proteins, which are these little machines in our cells that do work. And I was looking at how they evolve over time to do different things. And so I graduated, wrote my thesis, which is a really long paper about that. And then afterward, I worked in a cancer research lab. And so up until this point, after I graduated from my master's program, I had some amazing experiences, and really just lovely experiences, honestly. As a student in science, I always felt like I belonged. I always felt like I had a place. I felt like I was doing great things. And I really felt like science was my space. And I also felt like I had a great community in science as a student. And things kind of changed a little bit for me in how I felt when I was in a career position, right? Unfortunately, there's still a lot of growth that needs to happen in science career fields, right? I think things have really progressed, and there's a lot of people doing important work to make sure that these spaces are supportive, and that they are inclusive and fun and engaging for everyone. But there is still some work that needs to be done. And some of the lessons that I've learned in these spaces is about how I need to operate as a professional and as a scientist and someone who loves science and wants to pursue a STEM career, how important it is for me to carry myself in a particular way, and in a way that encourages STEM to continue growing in this positive direction. And so some of the lessons that I want to share with you that I've learned that have been helpful for me, not only as a student, but also as a professional, is to always just listen to your voice, your intuition. There's gonna be some times where you feel like things are amazing, right? You're doing your research, things are going right. You're doing experiments, for maybe you're in a lab doing experiments, you're in the field doing research, things are going great, but sometimes things don't go great, right? Quite often when scientists are doing research, things don't go right the first time. In fact, things rarely go right the first time. And that is not a testament to your ability as a scientist. It's just a part of the scientific process. It's okay to fail. Failure is a part of science. It's one of the biggest parts of science, and it's how we learn things in science. We learn from our failures, and then we optimize for future experiments or for, future hypotheses, et cetera. And the goal is to get better and better every time and answer questions every time, and ultimately, meet whatever goal we have at the end. And so there's this thing called imposter syndrome, where people feel like they're an imposter in their field. And that can be for whatever reason. It could be from, maybe your experiments aren't going right, you're not getting the data that you want. And so you feel like, oh, maybe I can't do this. Maybe it's not for me. When it's not really true, right? You're not an imposter, you belong there. Maybe things, you're just going through the regular scientific process. But also imposter syndrome can come from external factors such as other people. In my case, I've had people who weren't as open-minded as that I was working with, and they didn't understand the importance of diversity. They didn't understand how to really support people around them who didn't look like them, and how to make them feel welcome. And there've been several times where I've, worked as a scientist and felt like I didn't belong, but not because necessarily I thought I didn't belong, but because other people were signaling to me that they didn't feel like I belonged there. And it is common for people to develop imposter syndrome when they're in those kinds of environments. And so it's so important to understand your voice and know who you are and stand firm and be confident in who you are, and know that your passion for science and STEM as a whole really is the most important thing that you have when you are pursuing a STEM career. And as long as you stand firm in that passion and desire, there's nothing really that anybody can take away from you, right? Because your passion really should be driving all of these things that you're doing. Your decision to show up, for work or for school or to do your best. Nobody should be getting in the way of that. And so, with that being said, there are also things that we have to do to advance STEM culture. And this is something that I actually spoke about recently at a Johns Hopkins conversation. I had a fireside chat with them and their medical students. And they asked me a really important question. And that question was, tell us something that you had to sacrifice along the way in your STEM journey that was worth it. And my answer to that was, I sometimes had to sacrifice my comfort, right? And not in a way that was bad for me at all, right? But in a way that was good for me. Sometimes you have to be uncomfortable to grow. And sometimes you have to make other people uncomfortable to make institutions grow. I'll never forget, the moments where I was hesitant to speak up for myself or hesitant to make my needs known, because I was afraid of people judging me or people looking at me differently or people maybe not taking me seriously or misunderstanding me. And I recall these moments of hesitation where I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't speak. I shouldn't do this because it's making me uncomfortable to speak up for myself, or it's making me uncomfortable to, represent myself authentically because I don't want people to think of me different, right? And one of the most important things I learned was that it really doesn't matter, right? That discomfort and sacrificing that comfort and getting out of your comfort zone is one of the most important things you can do for yourself, because when you do that, you're able to speak up for yourself. You're able to advocate for yourself and tell people, hey, this is what I need. Can you help me? Or, I'm holding you accountable for this because this is your responsibility, or this is what I stand for. This is what I value. As a student, as a professional, right? As an individual, this is what I bring to the table. And those are all important things that should not be that shouldn't be inhibited by anything or anyone. And with that self-awareness and understanding, I've been able to make the most progress in my career. So whether it was when I was a student and I was, able to sacrifice a little bit of my comfort to speak up for giving graduate students livable stipends and wages, or whether I was a professional advocating for people to have spaces at work to breastfeed, right? And things like that, sacrificing a little bit of my comfort and being able to understand the value of my voice as a STEM professional and as a student has done really has really made a great path for me to help create spaces that are inclusive and fun and engaging for people as a whole. And I think that for me, as someone who has worked in higher education for some time now, I think one of the coolest things for me to see is for when students find their voices and when students realize that, yes, you're a part of something that is bigger than you, right? But I love seeing when students, especially high school students and college students, I love seeing them realize that we're all just humans at the end of the day. Each of us are special. Each of us belong somewhere. And each of us have a voice that should be valued and heard. And being able to watch students harness that voice and use it for positive change, or use it to advocate for themselves, and use it to create spaces for other people as well to join in and be a part of the science community is really amazing to see. And so I would love to encourage each and every one of you today to really look at your STEM journey and think about where you are today. Where do you want to be in the future? How are you going to get there? And I want you to think about, okay, think about this. What is that path going to look like? Is it going to be a straight line? Or are you going to take the scenic route, which I say, and do some exploration, right? You're going to have some failures. You're going to have ups, downs, arounds, left, rights. But at the end of the day, your goal is to get from point A to point B. And it doesn't matter if your journey is a straight line or if you're taking the scenic route and getting to the end. Your journey matters. And don't be afraid to take the scenic route. I feel like the scenic route was a very interesting route for me. And you also learn a lot about yourself along the way, the more chances that you take, and the more opportunities you give yourself to explore new things, and opportunities you give yourself to fail, right? And opportunities to succeed, etc. There's so much to be learned on the way. And I'm hoping that throughout that journey that you also discover your voice if you haven't already, or if you have, if you feel like you are confidently using your voice as a student and professional, continue using your voice and definitely work on that self-awareness to be aware of, your place and your space and what you want to do with your voice and what changes do you want to see in the world, whether it's in science or in society as a whole. And so I am really excited for your STEM future. I am happy to answer any questions that you all might have. You can reach out to me. I'm on social media. You can look up Dr. Raven, the Science Maven. I love talking to students about STEM journeys. I love to give career advice, and also I love to talk about science in general. And if you have any cool science to share with me, I'd love to hear that as well. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and see you soon. Bye.